So let's talk a little bit about obesity. Many have called it an epidemic. I would agree with that classification. I've read stats that 50% or 90% or more of North Americans have some type of metabolic dysfunction, which will include poor glucose control. And then in terms of just obesity or excess adiposity, I think that it's predicted that 50%, something, if we're not already there yet, of the United States and Canada will be obese. And I want to say it's 2030. I might have that number
Yeah,
wrong.
the WHO estimates that in 2030, 50% of the world population will be classified with obesity.
What do you think is driving that epidemic?
So there's different causes of obesity, right? It's not what we knew or thought before, that it was purely lifestyle induced. We know that it's multifactorial, and I think if we go by the causes, that will answer the question. Definitely one part is lifestyle, right? So depending how we're eating, how are we active or not active, that definitely can contribute, but it will not cause it 100%, right? We have genetic factors, right? So usually somebody with obesity, overweight, if we go to their family tree, there's going to be some obesity in either side, or in some patients in both sides of the family, they will have obesity. That accounts about 40 to 50% of why somebody would have obesity is family history. Then
is it the family history, or is it the behaviors that were modeled in that family?
There's so much data now that
it's like the nature nurture question, right? It's the nature versus nurture.
There's so much data now that the mother and the father's weight preconception will impact the offspring's weight, right? So if somebody is overweight or have obesity and they're going to conceive, then that child already has about 40-50% probability to have obesity in their life. Now, there's some studies that is showing that we're not only that getting through our genes, but highly palatable taste is also being genetically transmitted too. So even the taste for possibly processed food, ultra processed food, is getting inherited now. So it goes beyond what a person can do in their life. If their parents, grandparents are exposed and have obesity, then that already gives you 50% chance that you're going to have obesity, right?
And just so my understanding here, is it that genetic or is that epigenetic?
Epigenetic.
It's epigenetic. Because when I think about my family, so on my father's side, Portuguese immigrants to Canada, all morbidly obese, all had type 2 diabetes, refused their doctors, like they just needed their lard with everything. And then on my mother's side, they're Lebanese, from the Middle East, and, sort of half and half, right? So some of them were overweight, some of them weren't. And so if you think about that if I look at myself as an N of one, I should be obese. And when I was younger and I was eating a lot, when I was modeling their behaviors, like overeating Sunday dinners, like all the food and all the, then the dessert and of course that would predict my obesity or my, how much adiposity I was carrying. I had a mother who was very like kind of a, health nut, if you will, like very much into food and very much into exercise. So I was able to benefit from sort of her philosophy and the way that she was moving. So I always wonder when we're talking about obesity, certainly I agree with you that there's a genetic component, and we just sort of touched on that one where, the reward centers in the brain for individuals who are, and I have this too, like when I eat something that I really love, like it's really hard for me to stop. So that sort of reward center feedback loop certainly can make it much more difficult for those individuals to manage the caloric intake that they're taking. And I wonder, and this is where I would love for you to weigh in, the epigenetic changes, like above the gene is something that we can possibly affect, right? We can affect those epigenetic changes. Exactly. We have some agency over it.
So the perfect example is your mother. Yeah, no, the perfect example is your mom, right? That she has genetically that predisposition, but she changed her environment. She changed the way that she eats, that exercises, so she was able to modify. Very similar to type 2 diabetes, right? Somebody can be predisposed genetically, but they modify and manipulate their environment to prevent from developing the disease, right? But if they wouldn't do that, if they wouldn't do those changes, if your mother wasn't a health nut, as you called, then probably and most likely she would have developed obesity herself too, right? And that's one part that we call the environmental causes of obesity. And that is a perfect example, is what we're exposed, right? The food industry, the plastics, the endocrine disrupting chemicals, all of that they promote obesity. So if you are able to really minimize those effects of the environment, also where we live, does it promote walking? Does it promote sedentarism, right? So those things can be more modifiable than you modifying your epigenetics, right? Your gene inheritance. There's things that can be done to modify that. Then we have hormonal causes that can also promote obesity. We have PCOS, we have perimenopause, menopause, right? All those changes in our hormones can promote body composition changes, can promote obesity. And then we add aging to it, right? So aging can also promote weight gain and obesity because we're decreasing our metabolism because we tend to lose muscle mass as we age. So if you think about it, it's really more complex than what we used to think of, just eat less and exercise more. And that's what we were always recommending our patients for decades. And they were not losing weight, right? And patients were actually doing what I'm discovering in my clinic, or that I have discovered in my clinic, is that patients were actually listening to us. Patients were actually doing the legwork that we were asking, but we were not accounting for genetics, environmental, hormonal changes, aging that was making it very hard for the patient. If they just try to modify one variable, it becomes not sustainable because of all the other factors promoting and pushing the patient to gain weight or make it difficult for them to lose weight.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to your point, I agree with you with this idea that obesity is much more complex than eat less, move more. And I feel like even that advice is really very vague, like eat less of what? Move more how? So I think that when you think of eat less, move more, most patients are going to over aggressively calorically restrict, which of course causes this rebound. We all know, we've all tried it. We're like, I'm going to reduce my calories by 500 a day, so I can lose 1 pound a week. And like, that's too much of a caloric deficit for many individuals. And then when you think of move more, it's usually, well, I'm going to get on the treadmill and run.
Yeah.
And getting on the treadmill is great for your cardiorespiratory fitness, great for your, pulmonary function. And what you're going to do on the treadmill, especially if you are not incorporating weights and resistance training, is your body is just going to get smaller overall, right?
Yeah.
Which includes a loss of muscle mass, right? So your body's going to say, okay, she's running all the time now, so I'm going to be more efficient at running. And in order to do that, this muscle over here in my arms, in my back, and even in my legs, I don't need this. So let me just take all the amino acids out of that and then just lose it.
Yeah.
So I think that eat less, move more mantra is very non-specific. And I think in many cases, most individuals who hear that from their clinician are just like, all right, I'm going to have a grapefruit for breakfast. And I've had women tell me I have grapefruit for breakfast and then one egg for lunch, and then some like cottage cheese or something for dinner. And it's like, that is not, and you are going to fall off of that program so hard, because anybody can do that for maybe a week, maybe even a month, but you cannot sustain that long term. Like, that is not something that feels good and that can be sustained over the long term.
Yeah, and one thing that I'm discovering in my patients, because I do body compositions on every single patient from day one till chronically, I do body compositions on every visit. And what I'm looking is patients that when we do like those non-sustainable, severe restrictive diets or caloric intake, if we're not looking at a body composition, what the patient is mostly losing is muscle mass, right? And when you lose muscle mass, you slow down even further your metabolism. So you would have to even eat less calories to sustain the weight loss. And that's why that doesn't work, because you're losing muscle, and muscle is our burning calorie machine, right? So it's actually counterproductive when we were recommending that, right? Or when we are just quantifying weight loss by a number in pounds, with not really knowing what the patient is losing, and they may be slowing even more their metabolism, and it's going to become even harder for them to lose weight.